The rain in Graybridge isn't soft. It's a cold, hard assault that finds every crack in your shoes and every tear in your jacket. Tonight, it was slicing sideways, turning the alley behind the Starling Diner into a slick canyon of reflected light. The diner's neon sign, a buzzing pink starling, flickered erratically, casting grotesque shadows that danced with the steam rising from the vents. I huddled against the wet brick, my backpack clutched to my chest. The canvas was already soaked through, the strap digging a familiar groove into my shoulder. I was trying not to cry. I really was. But the tears came anyway, hot and silent, mixing with the rain on my cheeks. Lyle Drummond had done it again. He'd taken my whole paycheck, all of it. He'd held it up, waved it in my face in the greasy heat of the kitchen, and then slid it into his own pocket. For the broken plates, Mara, he'd sneered, though he knew I hadn't been the one to drop that stack. And for the kitchen fees, everyone pays. I had 37 cents in my pocket and rent was due yesterday. As if that wasn't enough, my phone had buzzed an hour ago. A text from Trevor, my ex. Saw you walking home. You look cold. Maybe you should have been nicer. I know where you sleep. The combination of Lyle's theft and Trevor's threat had finally broken me. I'd made it to the alley before the first sob escaped. I was trapped. No money, no safety, nowhere to go. Just the smell of wet garbage and the unending sound of the downpour. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the mouth of the alley. It wasn't a person. It was a car. A long, black sedan that seemed to drink the meager light. It didn't make a sound, just glided over the broken asphalt like a shark cutting through filthy water. It stopped, idling 20 feet away. Its engine a low thrum I felt more than heard. My breath hitched. This wasn't a customer. This wasn't anyone who belonged here. The driver's window lowered just a crack. Rain hissed against the tinted glass. I saw the orange-red pinpoint of a cigar cherry, glowing brightly in the dark. Then a plume of smoke, rich and aromatic, curled out into the wet air. A man was watching me. My instinct wasn't just fear. It was a primal terror that locked my muscles. This was how girls like me disappeared in Graybridge. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to become invisible. He wasn't leering. Not like the usual drunks who stumbled out back. He was just watching, assessing. The car door opened, but only slightly, pushing a sliver of warm, dim interior light into the alley. A voice cut through the rain. It was low, smooth, and coated in gravel. "Who hurt you?" It wasn't a question I knew how to answer. It wasn't, "Are you okay?" or "What's wrong?" It was specific. Who? It wasn't sympathetic. It felt like an assessment, like a doctor asking where the break is or an exterminator asking where the nest is. It vibrated with a quiet, absolute power I couldn't name. Before I could find my voice, the diner's back door slammed open, vomiting a rectangle of yellow light and the smell of stale beer onto the pavement. Well, Mara, figured you'd be out here," Lyle Drummond sneered. He was wiping his greasy hands on an apron that was maybe white 3 years ago. Flanking him were the two cooks who never touched a pan, Milo and Sant, his collectors, his thugs. Lyle's eyes flicked to the black car, registered its expense, and then, fatally, dismissed it. He thought it was just a customer I was trying to solicit. His mistake. "Still short on that kitchen fee, sweetheart," he taunted, stepping toward me. I flinched, clutching my backpack like a shield. "You didn't pay me, Lyle. You took my whole check. That's illegal." "Wages are earned, breakage is paid," Sant growled, cracking his knuckles. He was the one who'd cornered me by the walk-in last week. Lyle's eyes narrowed, his gaze dropping from my face to my neck. To the one thing of value I had left, the one thing they hadn't taken. "You know," he said, a greasy smile spreading across his face. "There's always another way to pay." He lunged. I wasn't fast enough. I screamed no as his fingers, hot and slick, closed around the delicate gold chain. He ripped it from my throat. The clasp snapped, stinging my skin. He held it up, dangling it under the flickering neon. my grandmother's locket. Pretty, he mused, weighing it in his disgusting hand. This might cover half of what you owe. I clawed for it, tears of rage and grief blurring my vision. Give it back, please. Lyle, it's all I have. I believe, the low voice from the car said, that you have something that doesn't belong to you. The black car door opened fully. The man emerged. He didn't slam the door. It closed behind him with a heavy, insulated thud. He was tall. He wore a suit so dark and perfectly tailored it seemed to shed the rain. Cassian Vale. My blood turned to ice. Everyone in Greybridge knew the name, the Vale Syndicate. They said he was trying to clean up his family's business, that the old ways were dead. But the whispers clung to him like the fog off the harbor. This was not a man you crossed. This was not a man who helped girls crying in alleys. He hadn't moved toward us, but his presence had shifted the alley's center of gravity. Lyle, Milo, and Sant were suddenly, fatally, outnumbered. Two other figures had materialized from the rain, separating themselves from the shadows of the sedan. A man, Victor, built like a brick vault, and a woman, Inez, who moved with a dancer's lethal, fluid grace. They were at Lyle's flanks before Milo and Sant could even register them as threats. I saw Sant's hand twitch, reaching for the heavy-looking object tucked in his waistband. Inez moved. It wasn't a fight, it was an adjustment. Her hand blurred, a pale streak in the dark. There was a sharp, sickening crack, not of bone, but of plastic and metal. Sant's phone, the one he used to film his intimidation tactics, clattered to the pavement in two pieces. His hand was still at his waist, empty. Milo, seeing this, raised his hands in a gesture of absolute, terrified surrender. It was over in a second. It was so fast, so quiet. It was like a magic trick. No one had raised their voice. Cassian Vale walked forward, the rain seeming to part for him. He ignored the muscle. He stopped directly in front of Lyle, close enough that the smoke from his cigar ghosted across Lyle's face. Lyle was trying to look tough, but he was visibly shaking, his bravado evaporating in the cold air. "Lyle Drummond," Cassian said. His voice was the same, calm and impossibly deep. He placed one gloved hand on Lyle's shoulder. It looked almost like a friendly gesture, if you didn't see the raw terror in Lyle's eyes. He leaned in. I couldn't hear everything, just whispered fragments that cut through the sound of the rain. Bank of Eros, account 448, the Cayman Ledger, shipment manifests. Lyle stopped breathing. The ruddy color drained from his face, leaving behind a grayish, doughy mask. He looked like he was going to be sick. The hand holding my necklace was shaking violently. Cassian Vale removed his hand from Lyle's shoulder. He didn't take the necklace. He just waited. Lyle, looking like he'd just seen his own ghost, opened his trembling hand. Cassian plucked the chain from his sweaty palm. I was already backing away, sliding along the wet brick, trying to melt into the wall. I didn't want this. I didn't want this kind of help. This was out of the frying pan and into the abyss. This kind of rescue always came with a price I couldn't afford. "Wait," Cassian Vale said. I froze. He walked over to me. He smelled of expensive tobacco, damp wool, and something cold, like metal. He held out his gloved hand. My grandmother's locket rested in the center of his black leather palm. My hand shook so badly I could barely take it. "How?" I whispered. I looked back at Lyle, who was now leaning against the diner wall, hyperventilating. I realized then he didn't take it from Lyle just now. He must have lifted it off him during that brief, terrifying moment he put his hand on his shoulder. While he was destroying him with words, he was also picking his pocket. "He won't bother you again," Cassian stated. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a small, heavy card. It was matte black, with embossed silver lettering. It didn't have a name. It just said Nighthawk Club and an address down by the wharf. He pressed the card into my hand. My fingers were so cold I almost dropped it. "My club is legitimate," he said, his dark eyes fixed on mine. "The pay is fair, and the kitchen is safe. Ask for Inez. She'll find a place for you, if you want it." He turned, without waiting for an answer, and walked back to the sedan. Victor and Inez were already inside. The door closed with that same silent, heavy thud. The car pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the Graybridge night. I was left alone in the alley with a pale, vomiting Lyle Drummond and his two useless, terrified collectors. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I ran. I ran past the busted-up bins, past the corner bodega, and didn't stop until I was barricading the flimsy door of my tiny, peeling paint room 6 blocks away. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. I was soaked to the bone, the cold finally sinking deep into my marrow. I collapsed on the cot, my backpack falling to the floor with a wet smack. The card from the Nighthawk Club was still clutched in one hand. The locket was in the other. It was safe. My fingers, numb and white, fumbled with the clasp. I clicked it open. The tiny, faded picture of my grandmother, smiling in her youth, was still there, safe behind the tarnished silver. But as I went to close it, my thumb brushed against something on the back of the locket, a texture. I sat up, pushing my wet hair out of my eyes. I held it under the dim, buzzing light of my bedside lamp. It was an engraving. It was tiny and precise, worn down by time, but unmistakable. I'd never noticed it before. It was a bird, a small, stylized bird in flight. My blood ran even colder than the rain had made it. I knew that bird. I had been staring at it for 6 months, wiping grease off its neon counterpart. It was the Starling, the exact same logo used by the Starling Diner. That was impossible. My grandmother never worked at a diner. She was a singer, a lounge singer. Back in the day, before I was born, she used to joke she sang in places that were all smoke and shadows. She died when I was 10, leaving me nothing but this locket and a box of old photographs. Why would her locket have the diner's logo? I looked from the impossible engraving to the black business card in my other hand, Nighthawk Club. A jazz bar. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the only sound was the steady drip from the leaking window frame. Lyle Drummond, Trevor Knott, they thought I was weak, a wet, crying girl in an alley they could kick around and discard. Cassian Vale. I didn't know what he thought, but he had seen me. He had asked who. He gave me back my past, and he offered me a choice. I closed my hand around the locket, the sharp edges of the engraved starling digging into my palm. I am tired of being the girl who cries in the alley. I am tired of being hurt. I didn't know what Cassian Vale was. He was a gangster, a monster, a savior. It was a door, standing open in the middle of a flooding hallway. I was going to walk through it. I was done being a victim. The Nighthawk Club didn't have a sign, just a heavy, unmarked oak door at the end of a cobblestone street near the wharf, a single gas lamp hissing beside it. Taking that first step inside felt like crossing into another country. The air, thick with the scent of bourbon and cedar, was warm and alive. The chaos of Graybridge's streets dissolved, replaced by the low thrum of conversation and the liquid gold of a saxophone. A woman was singing a song called Goodnight Harbor, her voice a velvet ribbon winding through the amber-lit room. This wasn't a dive bar. It was a cathedral of shadows and secrets. Inez was waiting for me, just as he'd said. She stood by the host stand, her posture impossibly straight, her dark hair pulled back in a severe knot. She wasn't smiling. "Mara Quinn," she said. It wasn't a question. "Follow me." She led me past the main bar, where patrons in expensive clothes laughed quietly, and up a narrow, curving staircase to a small mezzanine that overlooked the main floor. The office was spare, a steel desk, 2 chairs, a single window looking out at the rain-slicked rooftops. From a balcony just outside the office door, I could see Cassian Vale. He was leaning on the wrought iron railing, looking down at the stage, a cigar held loosely in one hand. He hadn't acknowledged me, but I felt his awareness like a change in atmospheric pressure. Inez gestured for me to sit. "I have some questions." I braced myself for the usual interrogation prior employment. References, skills. I'd already invented a story about being fired for talking back, something more palatable than the truth. Inez's questions were not usual. "Who is your emergency contact?" she began, her gaze unwavering. I blinked. "I don't have one." "How do you take your coffee?" "Black, 2 sugars." "What is your favorite meal?" The question was so unexpected, so disarmingly normal that the truth slipped out before I could stop it. "My grandmother's Cioppino. She made it with extra fennel." "What was the last book you read?" "A Field Guide to North American Birds," I answered, my voice sharp. "I like to know what I'm looking at." She made a small, almost imperceptible nod. She wasn't writing anything down. This wasn't an interview. It was an inventory. She was mapping my life, looking for weaknesses, for attachments, for anything that could be used as leverage against her boss. I met her stare, refusing to look away, letting her see the defiance I hadn't known I possessed until last night. I had nothing left to lose, which meant she had nothing to take. When she finished, she simply stood. "Wait here." She stepped out onto the balcony and spoke to Cassian in a voice too low for me to hear. He didn't turn around, just nodded slowly. He took one last long draw from his cigar before putting it out in an ashtray. Then he came inside, filling the small office with his presence. "You're hired," he said, his voice the same low rumble I remembered from the alley. "Assistant night kitchen manager, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., 5 nights a week. You'll report to Inez. We offer benefits after 60 days. The pay is double what you were making at the Starling." He paused. "There will be no overtime you don't ask for, and you will not be asked to participate in any business that is not conducted on this property." My suspicion was a physical thing, a sour taste in my mouth. "Why?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why me?" His eyes, dark and unreadable, finally met mine. "My organization is transitioning. Legitimate businesses require legitimate people. You needed a job. I had one open. The equation is simple." It wasn't simple at all. It was the most complicated thing that had ever happened to me, but I saw the way out he was offering. The clean, well-lit path away from Lyle and Trevor and the suffocating desperation of my life. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll take it." Downstairs, the singer had finished her set. A man took her place at the grand piano on the small stage. He was older, with a shock of white hair and the long, elegant fingers of a lifelong musician. The host announced him as Ezra Klein. He began to play, and the melody that filled the club was hauntingly familiar, a tune of rain and melancholy and lost things. It made me think of my grandmother again, of the stories she told about her life before me. She'd made a record once. She'd said, "A single, independent pressing, lost to time." Inez showed me the kitchens, the staff room, the route to the back alley for deliveries and trash. It was a world away from the Starling's grease-caked squalor. Everything here was gleaming stainless steel and quiet efficiency. My first shift ended at 2. Inez told me to leave through the side alley, a narrow passage that led to a quieter street. I was halfway down it, the cool night air a relief on my skin, when 2 figures stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. It was Milo and Sant. "Lyle wants to talk to you, Mara," Sant growled, a nasty grin spreading across his face. "He's very disappointed." My blood ran cold, but this time it was mingled with a hot spike of fury. I wasn't the same girl from last night. Before I could even scream, a shadow detached itself from a recessed doorway behind them. It was Inez. She moved with a terrifying economy of motion. There was no flashy fight, no wasted energy. She took Milo's arm, twisted it behind his back, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the brick wall. He went down in a heap, groaning. Sant spun around, pulling a small, heavy object from his pocket, but Inez was already there. Her hand chopped down on his wrist. I heard a sharp crack, and the object, a heavy wrench, clattered uselessly to the ground. She didn't break his arm. She simply disarmed him, her movements as precise and impersonal as a surgeon's. She stood over them, not even breathing hard. "You are on Vale property," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "You will leave now, and you will not return. Is that understood?" They scrambled to their feet and fled, disappearing into the night. I was leaning against the wall, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. A moment later, Cassian Vale appeared at the mouth of the alley. He walked over, his expensive shoes making no sound on the wet pavement. He stopped in front of me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He asked the same question as before, "Who hurt you?" But this time, he added more. "Tell me everything. Let me put it in the past." And so I did. The whole sordid story spilled out of me not in tears, but in a flat, angry torrent of words about my ex-boyfriend, Trevor Knott, who had introduced me to Lyle, about the predatory wage advance scheme they ran together, trapping desperate employees in a cycle of debt that could never be repaid, about the threats, the intimidation, the constant grinding fear. When I finished, the alley was silent save for the distant hum of the city. Cassian didn't say a word of sympathy. He simply took out his phone, dialed a number, and waited. "Mimosa," he said. "It's Vale. I have a new client for you. Mara Quinn, pro bono." "Yes, that one. Fraudulent labor practices, predatory lending, extortion. The employer is Lyle Drummond at the Starling Diner. The associate is Trevor Knott. I'm sending you her file. Open a case with the Graybridge Civil Arbitration Court. I want his assets frozen and all coerced debts nullified by morning." He listened for a moment, then said, "Thank you," and hung up. Just like that, a single phone call. He wielded power like a scalpel, precise and devastating. "Go home, Mara," he said, his voice a little softer now. "You're safe." Back in the staff break room, waiting for my heart to slow down, I took out my grandmother's locket. My hands were still trembling. I needed the connection, the reminder of where I came from. As I ran my thumb over the Starling engraving on the back, I felt a faint seam. It wasn't just a locket that opened from the front. The back plate seemed to be separate. My fingernail found a tiny catch. I pressed it. With a soft click, the back of the locket swung open on a minuscule hinge. It wasn't a space for another picture. Tucked inside was a tiny, intricate piece of metal. It was a spindle, no bigger than my pinky nail, with a perfectly machined hexagonal tip, like a miniature Allen key, a phonograph key. I was staring at it, completely bewildered. When Cassian walked into the room, he'd come to tell me one of his men would drive me home. He stopped when he saw the open locket in my hand, his gaze fixed on the tiny metal key. "What is that?" he asked, his usual composure gone, replaced by a flicker of intense curiosity. I don't know. It was hidden inside." He came closer, leaning over to look. "Let me see." I tipped it into his palm. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger. A look of recognition dawned on his face. "A Victor 9, he murmured, almost to himself. "It's a key for a Victor 9 phonograph. They were incredibly rare, custom-built. My grandfather had one." At that moment, Ezra Klein, the pianist, walked in to grab a bottle of water. He saw the key in Cassian's hand. "Now that's a relic," he said with a smile. "Reminds me of the old days. We've got a warehouse full of junk like that over at the archives. Test pressings, master tapes, half the jazz history of this city, collecting dust." Cassian's head snapped up. He looked from the key to Ezra and then to me. The air in the room crackled with a sudden, unspoken thought. He handed the key back to me. "Victor will take you to the archives. Ezra, you're coming with us." The Vale Syndicate's archive wasn't a dusty warehouse. It was a climate-controlled vault, filled with rows upon rows of metal shelves stacked with vinyl records and reel-to-reel tapes. Ezra, who apparently served as the collection's unofficial curator, led us through the aisles. "What are we looking for?" he asked. "A ghost," Cassian said. An independent pressing. The artist's name might be Lark. Ezra's eyebrows shot up. Lark. That's an old one. Haven't heard that name in 30 years. He led us to a back corner, to a shelf marked Acquisitions, Uncatalogued. After a few minutes of searching, he pulled out a plain cardboard sleeve. Written on the label in faded cursive was a single word, Lark. The record inside was a 10-inch shellac disc. It looked ordinary, except for one thing. Around the very outer edge, in the dead wax past the last groove, was a faint, almost invisible line of etching. It wasn't writing. It looked more like a barcode. There, in the corner of the vault, was an antique Victor 9 phonograph, kept under a velvet cloth. It was a beautiful machine of polished mahogany and brass, and on its spindle there was a tiny hexagonal hole. My hand was shaking as I held out the key from my locket. With a gentle nudge from Cassian, I inserted it. It fit perfectly. He placed the record on the turntable and carefully lowered the needle. A crackle of static filled the room, followed by the sound of a piano, and then a voice. A woman's voice. It was clear and sad and beautiful, a voice that knew about smoke and shadows. My grandmother. I listened, mesmerized, tears welling in my eyes. It was her. But halfway through the song, a second sound emerged, woven beneath the music, a series of high-pitched clicks and tones, a digital signal. Victor had brought in a laptop and connected a sensor to the phonograph's output. As the signal played, lines of code scrolled across the screen. When the song ended, the code resolved itself into 2 lines of text. A string of numbers and letters, where the iron birds sleep and the water turns to rust. Coordinates. Cassian breathed, staring at the screen. He knew them. I could see it in his face. The casual control was gone, replaced by a sharp, dangerous intensity. They point to Armitage Pier. He looked at me then, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing the man behind the syndicate boss. There was no pity in his eyes, no calculation. There was just a shared, sudden understanding. The look that passed between us wasn't about gratitude for a job or a rescue. It was the stark, undeniable recognition of one lonely, cornered soul finding another in the dark. Armitage Pier, he repeated, his voice low and grim. It's the last piece of the waterfront Roman Dax needs for his redevelopment project, the one he's been trying to take by any means necessary. The next night, the air at Armitage Pier was thick with salt and the metallic tang of decay. This was the place from the riddle. The iron birds were the massive, skeletal cargo cranes, silhouetted against the bruised purple sky, sleeping on their tracks. The water turning to rust was the graveyard of derelict freighters slowly dissolving in the harbor basin. I was no longer a kitchen manager. I was a conspirator, walking into the heart of a war I didn't understand, armed only with a dead woman's secret. We didn't use the main gate. Inez led me, Cassian, and Victor through a gap in a chain-link fence that looked like an accident but was clearly a planned route. Ezra, I was told, was not with us. He was at the extraction point. The pier was a labyrinth of 40-foot steel containers, stacked 3 and 4 high. The alleys between them were canyons of shadow, muffling our footsteps. I clutched the small, rugged laptop Victor had given me. The audio file of my grandmother's song queued up. Victor, moving with a silence that defied his size, held up a hand. We froze. From an alley ahead, beams from heavy-duty flashlights cut the darkness. Voices, not the disorganized chatter of pier guards. This was disciplined. North Shore. Cassian breathed, his voice flat and cold. He pulled me back behind the cover of a massive container. Irina Kroll. Dax isn't the only one who wants this pier, Inez whispered, her hand moving to the small of her back. This complicates things. It simplifies them. Cassian countered. He looked at Victor. They're here for Dax. Let them think they're finding him. He turned to me. The plan changes. Victor and I will create a diversion. A negotiation, Inez. You get her to the container. The coordinates from the file point to Sector 4. Stack 11B. My heart hammered. And then you get what's inside, and you meet us at slip 12. Do not wait. He looked at me, his gaze intense. Inez will get you there. Do exactly as she says. He and Victor melted into the darkness. Heading toward the lights, I heard Cassian's voice, amplified by the steel walls, impossibly calm. Irina, it's been a long time. I wasn't aware Armitage was under your protection. A woman's voice, laced with steel, echoed back. Vale, always turning up where you're not wanted. This is my business. As their voices tangled, Inez grabbed my arm. Now? We didn't run. We flowed. Inez moved through the shadows like she was made of them. I did my best to copy her, stepping where she stepped, breathing when she breathed. She led me away from the negotiation, deeper into the maze. We went under the main pier, onto a narrow, rotting catwalk suspended over the black, lapping water. The smell of creosote and dead brine filled my lungs. She pointed up, through a gap in the planks. Stack 11B, that's our target. The lock will be on the south-facing side. We climbed a maintenance ladder and emerged in a quiet, dark corridor of steel. Container 11B was painted a faded, anonymous blue. It looked just like all the others. But near the heavy locking bars, Inez brushed away a layer of grime to reveal a small, dark panel, no bigger than a postcard. It had no visible keyhole, just a small grill. The file, Inez commanded. My hands were shaking. I opened the laptop and hit play. The haunting sound of my grandmother's voice, the piano, and the interwoven digital shriek echoed weirdly in the enclosed space. I held the laptop speaker up to the grill. The signal played for 10 seconds. Nothing. Again, Inez hissed. I played it again. This time, at the very end of the musical phrase, there was a heavy, satisfying thunk. Inez didn't hesitate. She put her shoulder to the heavy bar and slid it open. The container door rolled back with a groan of metal. The inside was pitch black. Inez clicked on a low-lumen penlight. The beam fell on art supplies, but not the kind I'd ever seen. There was a massive, high-resolution 3D printer, racks of silicone molds, canvases that were pre-treated with chemicals to age them, tools for engraving and etching. He's not just forging money, I whispered, touching the surface of a mold. It was for a small, intricate bronze statue. He's forging art, antiques. Faster, Inez said, shining her light on a small, fireproof lockbox bolted to the floor. That's what we're here for. It wasn't locked. I flipped the catches and threw open the lid. It wasn't full of cash. It was full of paper, a thick paper ledger. I opened it. My blood ran cold. It was a list of transactions, dates and account numbers. Column A, Roman Dax. Column B, Graybridge Reconstruction Fund. He was washing the money from his forgeries through a shell corporation disguised as a civic charity. This was the proof. This was the weapon. I shoved the ledger into the new, sturdy backpack Inez had given me, zipping it shut. That's when all hell broke loose. A deafening klaxon blared across the entire pier. Floodlights snapped on, blinding us, turning the yard into a stark, white stage. Bureau of Trade Integrity, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker, laced with distortion. This is a federal raid. All occupants freeze hands in the air. My stomach dropped. Federal agents. Black-clad figures were swarming the yard, rappelling from the cranes, their vehicles blocking the exits. They wore tactical gear, helmets and vests with bold yellow letters, BTI. But Inez wasn't surrendering. She was pulling me back, her face a mask of furious concentration. They aren't feds, she hissed, shoving me toward the edge of the container stack. Dax's private army. He's cleaning house. Or he knew we were coming. We were trapped. I saw Cassian and Victor across the yard, near the gate. Irina Kroll and her North Shore crew looked just as stunned as we were, caught in the open. The fake BTI team was advancing on them, pinning them down. Victor didn't run. He sprinted, not away, but toward one of the giant, slumbering gantry cranes. He vaulted onto the maintenance ladder and began to climb, disappearing into the superstructure. The BTI team leader was shouting, "Vale Kroll on your knees!" Then the crane roared to life. Its shadow, a monstrous iron bird, passed over us. The giant magnetic clamp swung wildly, not picking up a container, but shoving one. A 40-foot steel box, weighing tons, slid across the slick asphalt with a sound like a mountain breaking. It slammed into the side of the BTI's armored truck, blocking their primary advance, cutting the foot soldiers off from their transport. It was absolute chaos. "Smoke!" Cassian yelled. He threw a canister that exploded in a thick gray cloud, completely obscuring the main yard. "This way!" Inez yelled, pulling me toward the smoke. We ran, blind, the sounds of shouting and metal crashing behind us. Through a gap in the fog, I heard a moan. "Inez, wait." "We don't wait." She tried to pull me. "No." I yanked my arm free. A few feet away, a young man in a peer security uniform, just a kid, maybe 20, was pinned. A heavy pallet of engine parts, knocked over in the chaos, had trapped his leg. His eyes were wide with panic. "Leave him," Inez ordered. I looked at her, and then at the kid. This was what I'd been my whole life, the one left behind, the acceptable loss. Not anymore. I grabbed the edge of the heavy pallet. "Help me," I demanded. Inez stared at me for half a second, her expression unreadable. Then she swore, a short, sharp curse, and grabbed the other side. On my count, 3. We lifted, adrenaline I didn't know I had surging through me. The pallet moved just enough. The guard screamed as he pulled his mangled leg free. "Go!" I yelled at him. "Get to the water, get out!" He scrambled away into the smoke. I turned back to Inez, breathing hard. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't the girl crying in the alley. I was the one doing the saving. "Impressive," Inez said, grabbing my arm. "Now run!" Cassian's voice cut through the smoke. High above us, "Mara, Inez, up here." He was on top of a stack of containers, silhouetted against the floodlights. Victor was beside him. Ladder Inez shoved me toward it. I climbed, my backpack heavy with the ledger. I scrambled onto the cold, metal roof. We were exposed, high above the yard. "Slip 12, move," Cassian ordered. We ran across the top of the container. The roof was slick with sea spray. We reached the end of the stack. My heart stopped. There was a gap. 10 feet of empty, black air between us and the next stack of containers, which led to the pier's edge. Victor, without a word, took a running start and leaped across the chasm, landing like a cat. I skidded to a stop at the edge, my shoes slipping. 10 feet. It was a mile. "I can't," I yelled, my voice ripping in the wind. "Yes, you can," Cassian shouted. Below us, I could hear the BTI. "They're on the ladder." "I can't." I was frozen, the terror I'd kept at bay finally flooding me. Cassian grabbed me. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. One arm clamped around my waist like a steel band, lifting me off my feet. "Hold on," he roared, and he jumped. We were airborne for a heart-stopping second. Suspended over the drop, we hit the other side hard. I stumbled, my knees buckling, but he didn't let go. His other hand shot out and grabbed my bare arm where my jacket had ridden up, steadying me, pulling me tight against him. His skin was hot. Even in the cold, even in the panic, a jolt went through me. It was raw, electric, a direct connection that bypassed my brain. It wasn't comfort, it was possession. It was the undeniable physical fact of his strength and my survival. We were chest to chest, breathless, the sound of the alarms and the shouting fading to a dull roar. There was just the grip of his hand on my skin, burning me. "Now," Victor said, his voice a low growl. He was already sliding down a heavy loading chute that dropped toward the water. Cassian let me go, and the world rushed back in. He shoved me toward the chute. "Go." I slid, landing hard on the damp, splintered deck of an ancient tugboat. Ezra Klein, the pianist, was at the wheel, his white hair blowing in the wind. "Took you long enough," he shouted over the rumble of the engine. Cassian and Inez landed a second after me. "Cast off," Cassian yelled. Ezra threw the throttle, and the old boat's engine roared. We pulled away from slip 12 churning black water and slid out into the darkness of the harbor. I looked back. Armitage Pier was a blaze of light, a hornet's nest we had kicked. The flashing red and blue lights of the fake BTI were everywhere, sweeping the yard, but they were cut off by the water. We had escaped. I was shaking violently now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving me cold and weak. I clutched the backpack, the ledger a hard rectangle against my back. Cassian walked over. His suit was torn, and a nasty cut was bleeding over his left eyebrow. He was watching me, his expression tight. He started to reach out, maybe to steady me, maybe to take the backpack. I flinched. He stopped his hand in midair. He looked at his own fingers, then at my face. He understood. "From now on," he said, his voice rough, "no one touches you." He clenched his hand into a fist, then slowly relaxed it. "Not even me. Not unless you say so." I stared at him, the wind whipping my hair across my face. He wasn't apologizing. He was setting a new rule, a boundary. He wasn't promising I would be safe. He was promising I would have a choice. The barrier I'd kept locked down tight. The one that kept everyone out didn't fall, but for the first time in my life, I felt a hairline crack run right through the center of it. The tugboat dropped us at a disused fish processing dock 2 miles upriver. A black SUV was waiting in the shadows, its engine silent. The ride to Renfall Street was quiet. The 4 of us, me, Cassian, Inez, and Victor, wrapped in our own adrenaline-soaked silence. The ledger in my backpack felt like a block of ice against my spine. The safe house wasn't a damp basement or a sterile box. It was a massive loft apartment in a converted textile mill. Exposed brick walls soared 2 stories high. Old-growth timber beams crossed the ceiling, and a wall of windows looked out over the glittering, indifferent lights of Graybridge. A gas fireplace was already hissing in a wide, modern hearth, casting a warm, flickering light over worn leather furniture. It was beautiful. It was a home, and that made it more terrifying than any alley. "First aid kit is in the kitchen, left of the sink," Cassian said to Inez. His voice was rough. He was still breathing hard, the adrenaline of the fight and the leap wearing off. He shrugged off his heavy, rain-dampened suit jacket, revealing the dark turtleneck underneath, taut across his shoulders. The cut above his eyebrow, which I'd only glimpsed in the chaos, was worse than I thought. It was deep, bleeding sluggishly, matting his dark hair. I found the kit before Inez did. It was stocked like a field hospital. I grabbed a fistful of antiseptic wipes and gauze. He was standing by the fire, staring into the flames, one hand braced on the mantel. He didn't seem to notice me approach. "You're bleeding," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast room. He looked over. He saw the supplies in my hands and tensed, as if I were holding a weapon. His eyes flicked to my hands, then to my face. "Stay still," I ordered, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. I wasn't asking. I stepped inside his personal space, into the heat radiating from his body and the fireplace. My hands were shaking. I could smell the rain on his clothes, the sharp tang of gunpowder smoke from the diversion, and underneath it all, that scent of cedar and expensive tobacco. I was so close I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the dark stubble on his jaw. A breath away. I lifted a wipe, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely hold it. "Let me," he said. His voice was a low rumble. He didn't take the wipe. He gently, slowly captured my wrist. His fingers were hot against my cold skin. He held my hand steady, guiding my own fingers to the cut. It was an act of such strange, shared intimacy it stole my breath. I cleaned the wound, my touch clumsy. He didn't flinch, didn't move. He just watched me. When I was done, I taped a strip of butterfly gauze over the worst of it. "It needs stitches." "It will heal," he said. Finally letting go of my wrist, the absence of his touch left my skin burning. He looked down at my arms. "You're hurt." I glanced down. My forearm, the one he'd grabbed, was scraped raw from the landing on the container. A long, red abrasion was welling with blood. I hadn't even felt it. He looked from the scrape to my eyes. His promise from the boat hung in the air between us. Not even me. Not unless you say so. "May I?" he asked. His voice was quiet, formal. It was the most respectful question anyone had ever asked me. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. He took a clean cloth and a bottle of antiseptic from the kit. He didn't grab my arm. He held out his hand, palm up, waiting for me to give it to him. I laid my forearm in his hand. His touch was firm, impossibly gentle. He cleaned the wound with a slow, methodical care that was the opposite of the violence I associated with men. He was focused, his dark eyebrows drawn together, the gauze on his own head a stark white against his skin. He worked in silence. When he finished, he wrapped a light, clean bandage around my arm. His fingers brushed my skin, and this time, I didn't flinch. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, releasing me. He turned and hung his damp jacket on a hook by the fire. I stood there, awkward, my adrenaline crashing, leaving me exhausted and hollow. I looked down at my own clothes, my Nighthawk uniform, now stained with grime, salt water, and I sniffed my sleeve. "Is that engine grease?" A sound bubbled up in my throat. It was ragged and unfamiliar. A laugh. It was a half sob, half giggle, a complete breakdown of every nerve I had. "I must look insane," I said, covering my mouth. Cashin turned back from the fire. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You look like you survived, Mara." He gestured to one of the leather armchairs. "Sit, Inez is checking the perimeter. Ezra is on his way with the ledger." I realized then that Victor and Inez had vanished, melting back into their roles as protectors, leaving us alone. I sank into the chair, the leather sighing under my weight. Cassian sat in the chair opposite me, leaving a respectful distance. The firelight played over the hard planes of his face. For a long time, we just listened to the sound of the gas jets. "The Lower Harbor District," he said, his voice soft, reflective. "That's where I grew up, before all this." He gestured vaguely at the expensive loft. "It wasn't like this. It was like your alley. Cold, wet, and full of men like Lyle Drummond." I watched him, surprised by the sudden confidence. "My father, my grandfather, they ran this city's shadows," he continued, his eyes on the fire. "They built an empire on things that break people. When my father died, he left me that empire, but he also left me the Lower Harbor. I swore I'd make the business clean. Legitimate logistics, hospitality, property. The Nighthawk is the first step. But men like Roman Dax, they like the shadows. They like pulling the strings, poisoning the well, all while pretending to be legitimate. They're the ones I can't abide." He was giving me a piece of himself, a reason. It wasn't just a power grab against Dax. It was a crusade. "I know about being trapped," I said, my voice quiet, matching his. "My whole life, I've been a thing for Lyle to steal from, a thing for Trevor to threaten, a thing to be kicked or ignored or rescued." I looked at him, at this dangerous, complicated man who had just saved my life. I'm tired of being chosen. I'm tired of being a pawn, even a protected one. I just want to be the one who chooses. For once, I want to look at the board and decide which square I'm going to stand on. Even if it's the wrong one, I want it to be my choice. My confession hung in the warm air. Cashin's gaze lifted from the fire and met mine. He saw me, not the crying girl, not the kitchen help, not the damsel. He saw the person who had just defined herself. He stood up slowly. He walked over and stopped in front of my chair. He didn't loom. He just stood. "Then choose," he whispered. He wasn't moving. He was waiting. This was the choice. He wouldn't touch me. He wouldn't take... He was leaving the final, terrifying move up to me. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I could smell the cedar and the smoke. I could feel the heat from his body. I could say no. I could tell him to step back, and he would. I knew it. I rose from the chair. I stood in front of him, our bodies almost touching. I raised a trembling hand, not to his face, but to his chest. I could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, beneath my palm. It matched the frantic rhythm in my own ears. "This is my choice," and I said. I lifted my other hand to his jaw, my fingers brushing the rough stubble. I leaned in and pressed my mouth to his. The kiss was hesitant at first, a question, a simple, soft pressure. He didn't move, didn't respond, letting me set the terms. Then I pressed harder, and his lips softened under mine. A jolt went through me, sharp and sweet. His hand came up, not to grab me, not to pull me, but to rest gently on my upper back. His fingers splayed wide, a point of warmth and stability. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was a gesture of presence. He was here, with me. I deepened the kiss, and he responded. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking the skin just below my ear. It was slow and deep and overwhelming. It wasn't the frantic, needy grasping I'd known. It was a conversation. It was deliberate and searing, and it made my knees weak. I tasted the faint, sharp tang of the antiseptic and the richness of his cigar, and it was the most intoxicating flavor I'd ever known. My breath hitched, my lungs aching. He pulled back, but only an inch. Our foreheads rested together. His breath was warm on my lips. I kept my eyes closed, trying to anchor myself in the moment. He said nothing, just breathed. Then he whispered. So low it was more a vibration than a sound, right against my skin. 1, you are safe. His thumb stroked my cheek. 2, you are respected. He kissed my temple, a feather-light touch. 3, you can stop this at any time. I opened my eyes. He was watching me, his gaze dark and intense, stripped of all pretense. He had given me all the power. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I leaned in and pressed my forehead back against his. A silent answer. Trust. It was a fragile, terrifying seedling, but it was there, taking root in the ashes of my old life. A harsh buzz shattered the moment. A black, encrypted phone on the coffee table vibrated violently. We both flinched. Inez was suddenly in the room, her face grim. She picked up the phone, glanced at the screen, and handed it to Cassian. "You need to see this." Cassian's expression hardened as he looked at the screen. He turned it so I could see. It was a news photo, a live feed image from a gala at City Hall. Roman Dax, smiling, shaking hands with Mayor Silas Penbrook, and standing right beside them, laughing. Her hand on Dax's arm like an old friend, was Irina Kroll. "She was never there for the pier," Cassian said, his voice turning to gravel. "She was a distraction. They're all in it together." "It's worse, Cassian." Ezra Klein had entered from a back room, the ledger in his hand. He was standing by a computer workstation I hadn't noticed. The ledger is a map. The Graybridge Reconstruction Fund was a slush fund started by the mayor's office. Dax laundered his forgery money through it, then funneled it into a shell company called Dax Urban Futures. That company then hired another shell, a security firm in Delaware. That's your fake BTI. The mayor is using public money to fund Dax's private army so they can seize the pier. And Dax's forged art sales are paying the mayor's kickbacks. The room was silent. The knot was tighter, more complex, and more rotten than I could have imagined. Cassian looked at the photo, at the smiling faces of the mayor, the gangster, and the rival. His face was granite. He looked back at me, the warmth from our kiss still tingling on my lips, but his eyes were cold. "I'm not a good man, Mara," he said, his voice flat. "I've done things in my life to keep this organization breathing that I can't undo." He tapped the screen, his finger landing on Roman Dax's smiling face. "But I will not sell this city's soul to men like him." The loft, which had felt like a sanctuary hours before, was now a war room. The fire had been extinguished. On a massive screen that had descended from the ceiling, Ezra had mapped out the flow of money from the ledger. It was a spider web of deceit, with Roman Dax and Mayor Penbrook at its center. A woman's face appeared on the screen via a secure video link. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back so tightly it looked severe. "Mimosa," Cassian said by way of introduction. "The ledger is damning, Cassian," the lawyer said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "But it's inadmissible. We obtained it during an unsanctioned breach of a private asset. It's fruit of the poisonous tree. We can't use it to lead—" "So we're back to nothing," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Not nothing," Mimosa corrected, her eyes flicking to me. "We have a map. We just need a clean starting point, a piece of evidence obtained legally that can justify a formal investigation. We need public-facing proof that the BTI is a sham, something a judge can't ignore." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the frustration. I pictured the Starling Diner, the greasy smell, the flickering neon, the constant feeling of being watched. Lyle. He was arrogant. He loved to show off his petty power. I remembered him bragging once about his new security system. My eyes snapped open. "The doorbell camera?" Cassian turned to me. "What?" "At the Starling," I said, my thoughts racing. "Lyle installed one of those smart doorbell cameras at the back entrance a few months ago. He said he wanted to catch employees taking unauthorized smoke breaks. It records everything. It would have seen Lyle's men meeting with those fake BTI agents. It has to be on there." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Cassian's face. "That's our starting point." "It's also in the middle of a hostile business," Inez pointed out, ever the pragmatist. "We can't exactly ask for the footage." "We won't ask," I said, standing up. An idea, reckless and terrifying, was forming in my mind. "We'll inspect." The lunch rush at the Starling Diner was a symphony of controlled chaos. The clang of spatulas, the sizzle of grease, the roar of the exhaust fans. I knew its rhythms by heart, which is why, when I walked in the front door flanked by Cassian and Inez, I knew exactly how to break them. I wore a crisp white button-down and carried a clipboard. Inez had a tablet. Cassian, in a perfectly tailored gray suit, looked like he owned the entire city block. We looked official, we looked expensive, we looked like trouble. "Lyle Drummond," and Cassian announced, his voice cutting through the noise. The entire diner fell silent. "Graybridge Health and Food Safety Commission. We're here for a surprise spot inspection." Lyle, who was berating a waitress near the register, turned pale. You can't. I'm not scheduled." "That's why it's a surprise. Mr. Drummond," I said, stepping forward. I started pointing. "Your dairy cooler is running 2 degrees too warm. Your dishwater is below sanitation temperature. And that," I said, pointing to a stack of unwashed plates, "is a cross-contamination violation." I knew his kitchen's every flaw. I led them back, my voice sharp and confident, citing regulations I'd looked up an hour ago. Inez was tapping on her tablet, making official-looking notes. Lyle was sweating, stumbling after us, protesting weakly. Cassian played the part of the bored, superior bureaucrat perfectly. He just stood by the back door, arms crossed, his polite, unwavering smile making Lyle more nervous than any threat could. "I don't understand," Lyle stammered. "I have an exemption. I was just cleared." "An exemption?" Cassian asked, his eyebrows raising in mock curiosity. "From whom?" "The BTI, the Bureau of Trade Integrity," Lyle blurted out, desperate. He fumbled in his grimy office and produced a piece of paper, a certificate, printed on cheap cardstock, with a poorly rendered eagle logo. "See, they did a full facility review last month, said I was a preferred vendor, gave me this waiver." Cassian took the paper, examining it as if it were a fine jewel. "Remarkable," he said, his smile never faltering. "A Federal Trade Bureau inspecting local kitchen grease traps. How very thorough of them." He handed the waiver back. "We'll still need to check your security logs. It's a new mandate. Data integrity?" While Cassian held Lyle's attention, Inez was at the back door. Her fingers flew across her tablet, which was now connected by a thin, almost invisible cable to the doorbell camera's hard drive inside. A progress bar on her screen filled rapidly. "All set," she said, pocketing her device. We turned to leave. "We'll be in touch with our findings. Mr. Drummond," Cassian said cheerfully. Do try to get that cooler temperature down." We were a block away, walking calmly toward our waiting car, when I heard the squeal of tires. Down Victor, who had been our silent driver, materialized in front of me. A battered red pickup truck, engine roaring, mounted the curb, aiming right for us. Time seemed to slow. Pedestrians screamed and scattered. There was nowhere to go. Victor didn't draw a weapon. He didn't even shout. He snatched a heavy, plastic traffic pylon from the edge of the sidewalk and, with a grunt of immense effort, hurled it. It wasn't aimed at the windshield. It skipped across the pavement and slammed into the truck's front wheel well. The steering snapped. The truck veered violently, missing us by inches, and crashed into the side of a parked delivery van with a sickening crunch of metal. The driver's door flew open and a figure scrambled out, disappearing into a nearby alley. I was on the ground, my ears ringing, Cashin's body shielding mine. He was on his feet in a second, pulling me up. "Everyone okay?" Victor was already helping a woman who had fallen. No one was hurt. He had saved us. But he had also saved everyone else on the sidewalk. He had neutralized the threat without escalating the violence. The veil principle. Back at the loft, Inez put the footage on the main screen. There it was, a clear shot of Lyle talking to two men in cheap suits who flashed fake BTI badges. Then, Inez kept scrubbing back, weeks, then months, then years. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Anomalies," she said. She stopped on a clip from 5 years ago. The image was grainy, the colors washed out. A younger, thinner Lyle Drummond stood in the alley, talking to a woman. My breath caught in my throat. It was my grandmother. She was vibrant, alive, her hair pinned up, wearing a stylish coat. She was holding the locket. The camera's microphone was surprisingly clear. "You hold this for me, Lyle," my grandmother, Lark, was saying. She pressed the necklace into his hand. "You owe Antonio Vale a debt. This is how you'll repay it. One day, a girl will come to you, my granddaughter. She'll be in trouble. When she is, you will make sure this finds its way to the next Cassian. Do you understand me? This is a promise. It's for the next Vale." Lyle nodded, looking terrified even then. I sank into a chair. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't random. It was a plan, set in motion decades ago. A debt of honor between a lounge singer and a gangster. A promise passed from one generation to the next. My grandmother hadn't just left me a keepsake. She had left me a guardian. Mimosa's face reappeared on the screen. "It's enough," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "The video of the fake agents corroborates the purpose of the payments in the ledger. It's the clean entry point. I can get a judge to sign a temporary warrant. The ledger mentions a warehouse Roman Dax leases in Factory District 5. That's where he's storing his equipment." The next hour was a blur. We were moving again, this time to a cold, anonymous industrial park. The warrant gave us a 2-hour window. The warehouse was vast and silent. Victor opened the roll-up door with a portable device, and we slipped inside. It smelled of chemicals and ozone. And there they were, racks of black tactical uniforms, boxes of vests with the yellow BTI lettering, and on a workbench, under a high-intensity lamp, were the heavy steel molds used to press the official-looking, entirely fraudulent BTI seals, the smoking gun. "We have it all," I breathed. That's when the sirens started, not in the distance. They were right outside. The building was instantly bathed in flashing red and blue lights. "It was a trap," Inez said, drawing her weapon. "They knew we were coming." The roll-up door began to rattle as they tried to force it from the outside. "No firefight," Cassian commanded. His eyes were scanning the room, calculating. "Inez, Mara, the roof access ladder, go!" He ran to a large electronic control panel on the wall. "Victor, with me." Inez was already pushing me toward a steel ladder in the back corner. I scrambled up, my heart pounding in my ears. Below me, I saw Cassian rip open the control panel. He slammed his hand down on a heavy red button. With a deep groan, a massive interior fire door, a solid sheet of steel, began to descend from the ceiling, separating the front half of the warehouse from the back. The BTI team finally broke through the main entrance, pouring in with weapons raised, just as the steel door slammed shut with a deafening boom. They were trapped inside the front section. I burst onto the flat, gravel-covered roof, gasping in the cold night air. The city lights spread out before me like a fallen constellation. Inez was right behind me. "This way," she shouted, leading me toward the far edge of the roof. "The next building is lower. We can make the jump." The roof was slick with a fine mist settling from the river. I was running, my boots slipping on the loose gravel. We were almost to the edge when my foot caught on a raised electrical conduit. I went down, hard. My ankle twisted, and I cried out, tumbling, sliding on the wet gravel, right toward the edge of the roof, toward the 3-story drop to the concrete alley below. Inez was too far away to grab me. I scrabbled for purchase, my fingers finding nothing but loose stone. A hand clamped around my waist. It wasn't a grab, it was an anchor. Cashin's arm was a band of steel, stopping my slide instantly. He was there, having scaled the ladder in seconds. With an effortless grunt, he hauled me back from the precipice, lifting me to my feet and setting me down behind the safety of a large air conditioning unit. He didn't hold me, and he didn't pull me against him. He just saved me. The touch was brutally efficient, entirely proper, and it sent a jolt through me more powerful than any kiss. My heart wasn't just racing from fear, it was hammering with the undeniable, terrifying reality of him. This man, who lived in a world of shadows and violence, had an instinct to protect that was as deep and immutable as the foundations of the city itself. And right now, it was all focused on me. We drove in silence, the echo of the sirens fading as we crossed the river. We didn't go back to the loft. Victor navigated the SUV through the old, cobbled streets of the lower harbor, a place I had only ever seen in daylight, and pulled into the shadows of a massive, deconsecrated church. Its limestone facade was stained with a century of city grime, but the towering, stained glass windows were pristine, glowing with a soft, internal light, Saint Helier. It was no longer a house of worship. The interior had been transformed. The pews were gone, replaced by a sprawling hardwood floor, painting easels, and quiet alcoves with pianos and music stands. It was a community arts center, funded, I realized, by the Vale Syndicate. It was silent, warm, and felt safer than any bank vault. Ezra was waiting for us, not by a computer, but by a long wall covered in framed, black and white photographs, a history of the neighborhood. "I thought you should see this," he said, his voice respectful. He pointed to a single, large photograph in the center of the collection. I saw her instantly. It was my grandmother. She was younger than I'd ever seen her, radiant, her hair swept up. She was laughing into a large deco-style microphone, a gardenia tucked behind her ear, Lark, and standing next to her, his hand resting on a saxophone, was a man with a sharp suit and a devastating smile. He had Cassian's eyes. "Antonio Vale," I whispered, the name from the camera footage suddenly having a face. Cassian stepped up beside me. His gaze was fixed on the photo, his expression unreadable. "My father," he confirmed, his voice rough. "He played before he took over the business." "They were fixtures," Ezra said quietly. "Lark and Antonio, the voice and the horn. This was taken the night of the 49 harbor sweep, the old bosses. The ones before the Vales tried to burn out the independent clubs that wouldn't pay tribute. Antonio was caught in an ambush at the old Rialto. He was pinned down." Ezra looked at the picture. The story goes that Lark, who was on stage, saw what was happening. She pulled a fire alarm, hit a note so high it shattered the glass. Through a spotlight, the legend changes, but she created a diversion. It gave Antonio the opening he needed to fight his way out. But in the chaos, she was trapped. He went back in for her, pulled her from the fire himself. A debt was formed that night, a life for a life, an unbreakable promise. Cassian looked from his father's smiling face to mine. His gaze dropped, landing on the locket at my throat. "The locket," he breathed, the pieces clicking into place for him just as they were for me. The clip at the diner, your grandmother giving it to Lyle, telling him to wait for the next Cassian. It wasn't just a key, it was a marker, a signal of that debt, a guarantee that if Lark's blood was ever in danger, the House of Vale would provide sanctuary. I touched the warm silver. My grandmother. She hadn't left me defenseless in a cold world. She knew men like Lyle and Trevor existed. She hadn't left me a simple trinket. She had left me a shield. She had chosen a protector for me, not based on his legitimacy or his power, but on a forgotten, old-world code of honor that ran deeper than any law. I wasn't the girl crying in the alley. I wasn't a pawn. I was an heir. I was the recipient of a promise made in fire and jazz half a century ago. The realization straightened my spine. As if summoned by the thought of my past, the fragile peace was broken. Inez entered the sanctuary, her boots silent on the wooden floor. "We have a visitor," she said, her voice flat, directed at Cassian. "At the Nighthawk. He's asking for her." She jerked her chin toward me. Trevor not. The blood drained from my face. Trevor. The name was a synonym for betrayal, for the beginning of my slide into debt and fear. "He says he has information," Inez continued, unimpressed. "On Roman Dax, he wants a deal. He looks terrified." "Get rid of him," I said, my voice sharp and cold. "I never want to see him again." Cassian didn't give the order. He just looked at me. His expression wasn't pitying. It was patient. He was waiting. "He's asking for you, Mara," he said, his voice quiet, "holding me accountable. It's your past. It's your call. You decide who you see. You decide what happens." This was it. The promise from the loft, the vow of respect and choice, wasn't just about him touching me. It was about this. He was giving me the power to face my own ghosts or to banish them. I was terrified of Trevor. I hated him, but he was terrified of Roman. And as Cassian had taught me, fear is a tool. Fear is leverage. I took a deep breath. "I'll see him." My voice shook, but it didn't break. "But not here, not on your property, a neutral place." I chose the Lumen Tea House on the edge of the university district. It was small, bright, and always full. The owner, Hannah, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who missed nothing. I'd called ahead. "Hannah, I need to meet someone. I need a witness. Can you be there?" She had simply replied, "The corner booth is reserved," and hung up. Trevor was already there, huddled in the booth, his knee bouncing frantically. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His skin was sallow, and his eyes darted to the door every time the bell chimed. The arrogant predator who had threatened me was gone. This was just a small, scared animal. "Mara," he breathed, trying to smile when he saw me. You look good." "What do you want, Trevor?" I slid into the booth opposite him. Hannah was wiping down the counter, close enough to hear every word. I didn't have to look for Cassian. I knew he was outside, a shadow watching shadows, respecting the boundary I had set. "I'm in trouble. Mara, deep. Lyle's gone. He just vanished after your friends paid him that health inspection, and Roman Dax, he's cleaning house. He thinks I'm a loose end. He thinks I talked to him." He nodded toward the street, toward Cassian. "Did you—" "No, I swear, look, I was an idiot. I was stupid. But I never wanted you hurt, not really. You put a tracker in my backpack. Trevor." I said it flatly. It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. His eyes widened in genuine shock, then squeezed shut. "He made me. Lyle. He said he needed to keep track of his investment. I owed him so much. Mara, I was in the same trap you were. You sold me to him to get yourself out." "I know," his voice cracked. "Okay, I know, and I'm sorry, but I can make it right. I can give you something." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "Roman is paranoid. He doesn't trust the cloud. He keeps an offline archive of all his communications emails, text logs, server data on a private server in his penthouse. I know. because I'm the one who installed the system for him, back when I was doing freelance IT. He frantically scribbled on a napkin. This is the server address, the admin login. The password, it's everything, Mara. All his deals, the real ones. He pushed the napkin across the table. It was the key to Dax's entire kingdom. I looked at the man who had so casually destroyed my life for a few dollars. I felt no empathy, no nostalgia for the person I once thought he was, just a cold, hard clarity. I don't forgive you, Trevor, I said. His face crumpled. He had been hoping for absolution. But forgiveness isn't what you need. You need to get out. I took the napkin. You will give this to me, and you will go to Cassian's lawyer Mimosa, and you will give her a sworn affidavit. Everything you just told me, about Lyle, about the tracker, about the debt, you will become a material witness. He'll kill me, he hissed, terrified. He'll kill you anyway, I countered, my voice as cold as his. He's cleaning house. Remember, this is your only option, my protection, in exchange for your testimony. That's the deal. He stared at me, really seeing me for the first time. Not the girl he dated, not Lyle's victim. He saw the person I was now. He nodded, a single jerky motion. Okay. I stood up. Leaving him in the booth, I walked out of the tea house into the cool afternoon air. The black SUV was parked across the street. Cassian was leaning against it, watching me. Not the tea house. He hadn't interfered. He had trusted me to handle my own monster. And I had? He opened the passenger door for me, a silent gesture of respect, the trust between us, so fragile before, settled, becoming something solid and real. We didn't get to use the information. Roman struck first. The next morning, the city woke up to a digital blitz. The Graybridge Tribune's website ran a banner headline, Vale Syndicate Implicated in Peer Forgery Ring. We were at the Nighthawk. The club closed. The evidence from the warehouse spread across the main bar. Cassian read the article aloud, his voice a low, dangerous growl. It quoted anonymous City Hall sources and concerned business leaders, a clear nod to Irina Kroll. It painted us as the criminals, alleging Cassian was orchestrating a smear campaign against a legitimate businessman, Roman Dax, to seize control of the waterfront. He's co-opting our narrative, Cassian said, tossing the tablet on the bar. He's painting us as the forgers, the launderers. He's poisoning the well. It's worse than that, Ezra said, his fingers flying over a keyboard. He's not just spinning, he's planting. These anonymous tips about Vale-owned shell companies. The transaction logs are faked, but they're good. He's trying to frame you for his own crimes. Prove they're fake, Cassian ordered. I can't. Not directly without a full-scale hack, Ezra grumbled. But I can legally request the transaction metadata from the Graybridge Information Lab. It's a public-private partnership. We can analyze the path of the data, if not the data itself. It took 2 hours. Got him, Ezra finally announced. The money transfers, the anonymous tips to the press. They're all originating from the same IP block, a dedicated server registered to Dax Urban Futures. He's arrogant. He's framing you from his own office. Before we could even form a plan, the television over the bar lit up with a special report. Mayor Silas Penbrook lived from City Hall, his face a mask of civic concern. No, and in light of these deeply disturbing allegations, Penbrook said, and the recent unfortunate violence at Armitage Pier, I am announcing a new public-private safety initiative. We will bring in the best private partners to help our dedicated police force secure the harbor for all citizens. The camera panned out, standing on either side of the mayor, looking professional and patriotic, were Roman Dax and Irina Kroll. My stomach clenched. Mr. Dax and Miss Kroll, the mayor continued, have graciously offered their resources and expertise to help stabilize the waterfront during this turbulent time. It was a political execution. He had just deputized Dax's private army and allied himself with Cassian's chief rival. He'd used the raid we survived as the public excuse. Cassian was now the enemy of the state. The room was deathly quiet. Cassian stared at the screen, his face granite. He had been completely, publicly, and legally outmaneuvered. I looked at the three of them on the screen, the mayor, the tech lord, the rival. They were smiling for the cameras. They were putting on a show. They were telling a story. I thought of my grandmother, standing on a stage, her voice cutting through the smoke. "No," I said. The men turned to me. "They're putting on a performance," I said, my voice quiet but gaining strength. "They're using a stage to tell their story, so we have to tell a better one." I looked from Ezra to Inez, and finally to Cassian. "We have to build our own stage." The Nighthawk Club was transformed. The intimate, shadowy corners were gone, replaced by the bright, focused glare of television lights. Every major local news outlet was here. Cameras perched on tripods, reporters murmuring into microphones. We had called it For the Harbor, a last-minute charity fundraiser with all proceeds going to the displaced dockworkers of Armitage Pier. It was our stage, and the house was full. Community leaders, small business owners, and the city's old money mingled, sipping cocktails, unaware they were the audience for an execution. I stood in the wings, my palms slick with sweat. Inez had found a dress for me, a simple, elegant black sheath. It felt like armor. I could feel Cassian's presence behind me, a silent, solid wall of support. He hadn't told me what to say. He just said, "Tell them your story." Ezra Klein sat at the grand piano, playing a soft, expectant melody. Then, the house lights dimmed. A single spotlight found the stage, and he nodded to me. It was time. I walked out, my heels clicking on the polished wood. 100 faces turned to me, curious, expectant. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening," I began, my voice trembling for a second before I locked it down. "My name is Mara Quinn. A week ago, I was a line cook, working 60 hours a week in a diner kitchen. A week ago, I was standing in a back alley crying because my boss had stolen my wages, and I didn't have enough money to pay my rent." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the speech they were expecting. I was trapped in a cycle of debt, the kind that so many people in this city know, the kind where the more you work, the more you owe. I was told I was worthless. I was told I was disposable. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. My story isn't unique. What's unique is what happened next. I told them about the necklace, the one thing I had left from my grandmother. I told them how it was ripped from my neck as payment for a debt I didn't really owe. I thought I had lost everything, I said, my voice thick with emotion now. But that night, someone gave it back to me. They didn't ask for anything in return. They just saw what was happening, and they intervened. I was careful. I never said his name. I never mentioned the Veil Syndicate. I just talked about a concerned business owner, a member of this community who believes in fairness. That intervention led me to a discovery, I continued, my voice growing stronger, harder. It turns out my story, the story of my stolen wages and my grandmother's necklace, was connected to a much bigger story. The story of Armitage Pier, the story of a company called Dax Urban Futures and a powerful man named Roman Dax, who promised our city a brighter future. The name dropped like a stone in the silent room. We were told that the waterfront redevelopment was being protected by a federal agency, the Bureau of Trade Integrity. We were told they were keeping us safe. My eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of the reporters. Tonight, I'm here to tell you that you have been lied to. The city of Greybridge has been the victim of a grand deception. That was Ezra's cue. He didn't play a grand, dramatic chord. He simply touched a key on a synthesizer next to the piano. The house speakers crackled, and then the haunting, familiar sound of my grandmother's voice filled the club, the song, Lark. The crowd was confused, captivated. As her voice soared, Ezra brought up the lights on a massive LED screen behind the stage. It was black. Then, as the bridge of the song began, The part with the hidden digital signal. A green waveform appeared on the screen, pulsing in time with the audio clicks and tones. The waveform began to resolve, the lines of code twisting and reforming like digital clay. The audience gasped as an image slowly took shape. It was an official-looking seal, an eagle, clutching arrows and an olive branch, and beneath it, the words Bureau of Trade Integrity. It was the fraudulent seal from the warehouse, rendered from the audio file on a dead woman's record. "This seal is a phantom," I announced, my voice ringing with conviction. "It was created by Roman Dax to give his private army the cover of federal authority." As I spoke, the image on the screen changed. The digital signal resolved into a new shape, a list of names, a personnel roster, and next to each name, a title, Lead Field Agent, Logistics Officer. "These are the agents of the BTI," I said, "and if you check their employment history, you won't find a federal service record. You'll find them on the payroll of Dax Urban Futures." The room exploded in a roar of whispers and furious tapping on phones. In the back, I saw Mimosa, our lawyer, tap a key on her laptop. "Filed," she mouthed. She had just submitted the new evidence to the Bay District Appellate Court in real time. And then the world went black. A collective gasp. The lights, the sound, the screen, everything died. A woman screamed. Roman had made his move. But the darkness lasted only for a second. With a heavy thrum, a new sound filled the room, a generator kicking to life, a set of secondary, warmer lights flickered on, bathing the stage and the room in an intimate, determined glow. The screen remained dark, but the point had been made. I didn't miss a beat. "Mister, Dax can cut the power to a room," I said into the now dead microphone, my voice carrying in the suddenly quiet space. "But he cannot cut the power of the truth." A few people started to clap. That's when Irina's move came. A table near the back of the room suddenly overturned with a crash of glass. Two large, belligerent men in cheap suits started shouting, shoving people. "This is a sham, a setup by the Veil mob," one of them yelled. The crowd panicked, surging away from the disturbance, but before it could escalate, a mountain moved. Victor, who had been standing impassively by the main entrance, flowed through the crowd. He didn't throw a punch, he didn't make a threat, he simply placed himself between the two thugs and the patrons. He put a hand on each of their chests, a gesture that was almost gentle, and simply pushed. They stumbled back, off balance. Victor just stood there, a human wall, shaking his head slightly. One of the men swung at him. Victor caught his fist, twisted his arm behind his back in a simple, non-injurious compliance hold, and walked him toward the door. Inez, appearing from nowhere, did the same with the other man. It was all over in 10 seconds. It was calm, professional, and every news camera in the room had captured it. They had recorded Irina's men initiating the violence, and Cassian's team ending it without injury. In the renewed chaos, Cassian was suddenly at my side. "You need a breath," he said, his voice low. He put a hand on my back, steering me through a side door and up a flight of service stairs. We emerged on the flat roof of the Nighthawk, the city spread out below us. A river of light, oblivious to the war we were fighting. The air was cold and clean. I leaned on the parapet, my body trembling with adrenaline. Cassian stood beside me, not speaking. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of cedar. We stood there for a long time, watching the traffic, the silence between us more comforting than any words. He didn't try to comfort me. He just shared the moment, letting me find my own center. He was letting me be strong. Finally, I turned to him. Did it work? "It's the first move in a new game," when he said, "We'll see." When we came back downstairs, the reporters were buzzing, but the patrons were being calmly escorted out. The show was over, and in the middle of the room, 2 uniformed officers from the Harbor Precinct were talking to a pale, sweating Lyle Drummond, who we had invited as a community stakeholder. One of the officers handed him a piece of paper, a subpoena. Lyle looked like he was going to collapse. He stumbled away from the police, pulling out his phone, and made a frantic dash for the men's restroom. Hannah, the owner of the Lumen Tea House, was standing near the coat check. She looked at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She had come to support the girl who stood up to the bullies, as she'd put it. Her phone was in her hand. Later, she would tell us that she had gone to the restroom herself, and her phone, which she used to record supply orders as voice memos, had been recording. She had stood in the doorway and captured Lyle's entire, panicked, one-sided conversation through the thin door of the stall. "Oh, no, Mr. Dax, I didn't say anything. I swear, they just showed up. The cops, they're here. They have a subpoena for me for the hearing. What do I do?" "You have to tell me what to do. Your emergency plan. You said there was a plan if things went south at the hearing." It was the final piece, the golden key, a direct link on tape from Lyle to Roman Dax, referencing a pre-planned conspiracy. The last of the reporters were filing out. The staff was quietly cleaning up the debris. The battle was over, for now. Cashin walked me to the main door. The street was quiet again. "You were incredible tonight, Mara," he said, his voice soft. I just looked at him, too exhausted to speak. He looked down at me, his gaze asking a silent question. I gave a small nod. He leaned in and gave me a kiss. It wasn't the searing, exploratory kiss from the loft. It was short and warm and certain. It was a promise. The next morning, the lead story on every channel was not about the Vale Syndicate. It was about Roman Dax, the fake BTI, and the mayor's office. And at the bottom of the screen, a breaking news chyron was scrolling across in response to new evidence. The Bay District Court has scheduled an emergency public hearing at Longshore Hall. All parties, including Roman Dax, have been compelled to attend. The morning of the hearing, the city felt like it was holding its breath. We moved not as a car, but as a procession. An armored SUV for me, Mimosa and Inez, a lead car with Victor, and a tail car, a small, dark bubble of Vale security against the entire city. "They know we're coming," Mimosa said, checking the buckles on her briefcase as if she were checking a parachute. "They will not make this easy." We were crossing the Halstead Bridge, the water of the Grey Bridge River a flat, metallic gray below us. When I heard it, not a gunshot, not a siren, a high-pitched electronic whine, like a furious insect, growing louder. "Victor!" Cashin's voice crackled over the internal comms, sharp and urgent. 11 o'clock. Hi, it's not police." I looked up, out the reinforced window. A black shape, a high-spec quad-rotor drone, was descending from the bridge's superstructure. It wasn't a camera. It was angled in a steep, aggressive dive. Its target unmistakable, our car. I didn't even have time to scream. "Hard target," Victor yelled. A thwump sound, like a compressed air cannon, fired from the roof of Victor's lead car. A small canister shot into the air, exploding in a bloom of high-tensile mesh. The weighted net unfurled, colliding with the drone 20 feet above our windshield. The drone jerked, its rotors hopelessly tangled. It tumbled, powerless, crashing onto the empty sidewalk, where it sparked violently and went still. No explosion. The convoy screeched to a halt. Victor was out of his car in a second, weapon at the ready, approaching the wreckage. He kicked it once. "It's clear," he called, his voice tight with adrenaline. "It's not an explosive payload. It's a component. It looks 3D printed." We didn't go to the hearing, not yet. We rerouted to a secure garage under one of Cassian's properties. Ezra was waiting, his face grim. Victor placed the tangled drone and the component he'd retrieved from its chassis on a steel table. Ezra examined it. "This gimbal mount," Ezra said, turning the piece of scorched plastic in his fingers. "It's proprietary. Signature design. I've only seen it in one place." He plugged a drive into his laptop. Kestrel Dynamics. A schematic flashed onto a portable screen. It was a perfect match. "Dax's pet project," Cassian said, his voice a low growl. his robotic shell company. The ledger showed he was diverting city reconstruction funds into it. "The hearing starts in less than 2 hours," Mimosa said, looking at Cassian. "This attack was a desperate, last-minute move. They must be moving something, securing their final pieces." "It's the last link, Cassian," I said, my voice finding a new, hard edge. "Dax, the fake BTI, the mayor. Kestrel is the tech, it's the how. We have to go." "It's a fortress," Inez warned. "After this failure, they'll be on high alert, waiting for a ground assault." I looked at the map Ezra had pulled up. The Kestrel building was a block of glass and steel in the old factory district. The elevated train line ran past its 3rd floor. "They'll be watching the street," I said. "They won't be watching the sky." I pointed to the tracks. "The platform is 2 blocks back. We can walk the maintenance line and get roof access. They'll never see us coming." Cassian looked at me, a flicker of pride in his dark eyes. "Good. The plan splits. Inez, you're with Mara. You're the ghosts. Get in. Get the proof. Get out. Victor and I will take the service tunnels. We'll disable internal security from the central node and meet you in the 3rd floor lab. Move." The wind on the elevated maintenance catwalk was a physical force, trying to peel me from the narrow beam. The roar of a passing train was deafening, a rush of steel and noise that vibrated in my bones. Inez was a machine, moving with a fluid, fearless grace. I just focused on her boots, planting my feet where she planted hers, my backpack with the ledger and the locket feeling impossibly heavy. We made it to the roof. Inez bypassed the alarm with a small device, and we dropped into a dark, echoing ventilation shaft, landing silently in a 3rd-floor utility closet. We emerged into the heart of the beast. The lab was sterile, white, and humming with a quiet, menacing energy. Drones in various stages of assembly lined the walls. And on a massive whiteboard, dominating the far wall, was the entire plan. It was a flowchart, Project BTI Integration Phase 2. It detailed in cold corporate language the plan to use Kestrel drones for crowd suppression and asset containment at Armitage Pier. It was the blueprint for a corporate state, funded by the mayor and enforced by Dax. My eyes went to the bottom. Under Project Lead Approved, there was a bold, arrogant signature in black marker, Irina Kroll. I pulled out my phone and took a dozen pictures. "We have it," I whispered. "We have the link." "How touching." The voice, like shattered glass, echoed from the doorway. We spun around. Irina Kroll stood there, flanked by 2 of her North Shore guards. She wasn't in tactical gear. She was wearing a crisp, tailored pantsuit, an image of corporate power. She looked at me with a lazy, contemptuous smile. "The little diner girl," she sneered. "Still playing dress-up in a world you don't understand? Did you really think you could save the city? Roman and I own this city?" "You own nothing," I said, my voice shaking but level. "You're just the hired help, signing off on his dirty work so he can keep his own hands clean." Irina's smile faltered, her eyes flashing with anger. She nodded to her guards. "Take the phone and be gentle. We wouldn't want to hurt the evidence." The guards started to move. Inez stepped in front of me. She didn't raise her fists. She raised her phone, its camera light on and recording. "Go ahead, Irina," Inez said, her voice chillingly calm, loud enough for the phone's microphone. "Give the order. We're on private property, which makes this trespassing for you. Give the order for assault, and you're adding it to the charges you already face. We have you on video at the Nighthawk inciting a disturbance. We have your signature on that board, linking you directly to a conspiracy to impersonate federal officers. The legal term is racketeering. You personally." Irina hesitated, her eyes narrowing. Inez pressed on. "Your guards will be tried as co-conspirators, but Roman, he'll cut you loose. He'll feed you to the feds to save himself. You'll be the one they make an example of, all for what, a city you don't even own." It was a brilliant legal assault. Inez had turned the threat of violence back on itself. Using the law as a blade, Irina was frozen, caught between her orders and her own survival. That's when I saw it, on the wall behind Irina's desk, partially hidden by a framed schematic, was a small, ornate metal plate. It was older than the rest of the lab, a relic from the original building, and in its center, a hexagonal indent. My hand went to the locket. "She's right," I said, moving slowly, deliberately, toward the desk. Irina's eyes snapped to me. "Dax is using you. He needed a public-facing rival to make his alliance with the mayor look legitimate. You're just a pawn." "I am no one's pawn," she hissed, distracted. I reached the desk. I pulled the locket from under my shirt, my fingers fumbling for the key. I slid it into the indent. It fit. I twisted. A soft click. The plate popped open on a hidden hinge. It wasn't a vent. It was a wall safe. Irina's eyes went wide with fury, realizing she'd been played. "Get them, get that phone." She lunged, but I was faster. I reached into the safe and my fingers closed around the only thing inside a single, black, leather-bound notebook. "Inez, go!" I screamed. I slammed the safe shut as the guards grabbed for me. Inez shoved a heavy cart full of drone parts into their shins, sending them sprawling. We sprinted, bursting out of the lab and into the stairwell, the alarm blaring. "Roof is a dead end," Inez yelled as we clattered down the metal stairs. "They'll be waiting." We burst through the doors on the ground floor. Cassian and Victor emerged from a service hallway at the same moment, a perfect timed intercept. "We're blown," Cassian yelled, not even breaking stride. "Main exit move." We ran as a single unit out the glass front doors and into the daylight. Civilians on the sidewalk stared as our team of 4, followed by Irina and her furious guards, sprinted up the stairs to the elevated train station. A train was pulling in, its brakes hissing. "We're not going to make it," I panted, my lungs on fire. "Yes, we are," Cassian shouted. The doors chimed, signaling they were closing. He shoved me and Inez forward. We dove through the narrowing gap, tumbling onto the floor of the car. Victor was right behind us, turning to block the way. The train lurched, doors sealing, and began to move. I scrambled to the window and looked back. Cassian, and he was still on the platform. Irina and her 2 guards were closing in on him, fanning out to cut him off. "Cassian!" I screamed, pounding on the glass. He wasn't running for our train. He looked past it. At the parallel track, another train was pulling in, heading the same direction, accelerating. He sprinted, he leaped across the open gap between the tracks, landing with impossible grace on the connector between 2 of the other train's cars. Irina was right behind him. She didn't hesitate. She made the same leap, landing on the car behind him. I watched, my heart in my throat, as the 2 trains ran parallel. Picking up speed, Irina, agile and furious, scrambled onto the roof of her train car. She had a collapsible baton in her hand. Cassian climbed up after her. They faced each other on the roof of a moving train, the city skyline blurring behind them. She lunged, Amoy, swinging the baton. Cassian ducked, evading. He wasn't attacking. He was moving, luring her toward the front of the car. He was timing it. I saw the shadow of a low pedestrian bridge approaching. Cassian didn't strike her. As she raised the baton for another swing, he lunged low, tackling her at the knees. It wasn't a violent hit. It was a controlled, rolling takedown. He wrapped his arms around her, pinning her flat to the roof, his body covering hers, just as the bridge's steel girders passed inches over their heads. She was trapped, immobilized. He had used the environment, his weight and his timing, not his fists. Our train pulled into the next station, theirs. Now clear, sped past, but as we stumbled onto the platform, Cassian was already there, walking calmly down the steps from the other side. He was adjusting his cuffs. Irina was nowhere to be seen. Her pursuit finally, definitively, ended. We were in the SUV, racing toward Longshore Hall, dangerously late. I had the notebook open. It was Roman's, filled with his tight, controlled script, dates, payments, and one entry, circled for today. Longshore hearing, 10 a.m., evidence containment, and next to it, 2 words, emergency button. Mimosa, whom we'd scooped up from a corner, read it. Her face went pale. "The fire alarm," she whispered. "Of course. He's not going to run. He's going to trigger the alarm, create a panic. In the chaos, his fake BTI, dressed as court security, will swap the real evidence boxes for fakes. He'll walk free, and our entire case will be compromised." "Ezra," Cassian said into his comms, "he's triggering the fire alarm. Can you stop it?" "Negative," Ezra's voice crackled back. "It's a hardwired system. I can't stop it from ringing, but Tiwani, I think I can reroute what it triggers. Stand by." The SUV screeched to a halt in front of the massive stone steps of Longshore Hall. A circus of news vans and protesters choked the plaza. Cassian turned to me in the back seat. His face was granite, the cut above his eye a stark, healed line. "This is the line. Mara, they'll be watching for me. I'm the target. I'll go in first. I'll draw their security. You stay with Mimosa. You are the witness. You have the ledger, the notebook, the photos. You are the one who has to make it to the stand. Do not leave her side, whatever happens." He was going to be the distraction, the sacrifice. He was going to use his reputation as a gangster to draw all the fire so that I, the innocent victim, could slip through. I looked at him, at this man who had asked me who had hurt me, who had respected my choices, who had jumped across train cars for me. I grabbed his hand, my fingers laced through his, strong and tight. "We started this together, Cassian," I said, my voice low and fierce, leaving no room for argument. "We finish it together." He looked at our joined hands. He looked at my face, at the determination he had helped build. He gave a single, slow nod. Together, he agreed. We stepped out of the car and into the storm. We pushed through the plaza. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a wave of noise that crashed against the stone steps of Longshore Hall. Dax for Greybridge, justice for the harbor, Vale Mafia out. The air was thick with contradictory anger. Victor and Inez formed a tight diamond around me, Cassian and Mimosa, moving with a fluid, unified purpose. We were met at the massive bronze doors not by court security, but by the mayor's new public-private safety initiative, Dax's men, dressed in immaculate gray suits, their faces impassive, their hands clasped behind their backs. They looked less like security and more like an occupying army. "Credentials," the leader said, his voice flat. Mimosata, without flinching, presented the court summons. "Mara Quinn, Cassian Vale, counsel. We're here for the emergency hearing." The guard's eyes flicked over us, lingering on Cassian with a mixture of fear and contempt. He nodded curtly to another guard, who unhooked a velvet rope. "This way. You've been assigned a preparatory chamber." He didn't lead us to the main atrium. He led us down a side corridor, away from the press, to a small, oak-paneled room that smelled of old books and lemon polish. It was a holding cell dressed in mahogany. The heavy door clicked shut behind us, leaving me, Cassian, Inez, and Mimosa in the suffocating, antique silence. Inez immediately moved to the single, tall window, checking the sightlines to the plaza below. Mimosa snapped open her briefcase on the heavy oak table, her own form of battle prep. "They're trying to isolate us," she said, her voice sharp. "Keep us off balance before we even enter the hall. Don't let them." Cassian said nothing. He walked past the table, shedding the tailored suit jacket he had worn as armor for the cameras. He tossed it onto a vacant chair, revealing the crisp, white shirt beneath. The tension of the morning, the drone attack, the raid on Kestrel, the train-top confrontation was a visible, vibrating thing coiled in his shoulders. He stood with his back to me, facing the window. He unbuttoned his cuffs, slowly, deliberately. He began to roll up his sleeves, first the right, then the left. Each fold was a precise, controlled movement, as if he were locking something away or unlocking something else. His forearms were bared, strong and etched with veins, and he braced his hands on the dark, polished wood of the windowsill. He was containing the storm inside him. That image, the raw strength held in check by the simple act of rolling his cuffs, steadied my racing heart and, in the same breath, made it ache. Mimosa and Inez were murmuring in the corner, a low-voiced strategy session. I tuned them out. I walked over to Cassian, stopping just behind him. I could see the faint pink line of the cut from the pier above his eyebrow, but my eyes were drawn lower. At the open collar of his shirt, just above his collarbone, I saw it, a small, silvery white scar I hadn't noticed before, shaped like a crescent moon, an old wound. I don't know why I did it. I didn't think. My hand, which had been trembling, lifted. I reached out and my fingertips, tentative and light, brushed against the raised, smooth skin of the scar. He went rigid, a sharp intake of breath, a flinch so subtle it was more a tensing of muscle than a movement. He turned his head, his dark eyes finding mine. He was so close, I could see the confusion in his gaze, warring with something deeper, softer. His gaze dropped to my hand, still resting on his collarbone, and then returned to my face. He didn't pull away. Instead, he slowly covered my hand with his own. His skin was warm, his grip firm, swallowing my fingers. "Mara," he breathed. His voice was a low, rough vibration, meant for me alone. He turned his entire body to face me, our hips almost touching. My hand still trapped between his and his chest. He raised his other hand, the one that wasn't holding mine, but he stopped, just as he had in the loft. His fingers hovered an inch from my cheek. "May I?" he whispered. It was the same question, the same respect, but this time it held the weight of everything we had been through. The chase, the fight, the shared danger. I couldn't find my voice. I just leaned in, closing that last, agonizing inch, and rested my forehead against his chest, right over his heart. It was hammering, a frantic, powerful rhythm that echoed the one in my own chest. I shut my eyes, breathing in his scent. It wasn't the smoke or the rain of the alley. It was clean starch, the sharp, warm scent of cedar, and a faint, lingering trace of bitter orange. It was the scent of Cassian, the man, not the myth. His arms came around me, pulling me in. One hand splayed flat across the small of my back, the other cradling the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair. It wasn't a desperate grasp. It was an anchor in a raging sea. He held me for a long, silent moment, as if he were memorizing the feel of me, as if he were the one being saved. He tilted my chin up with his thumb. His eyes, dark and turbulent, searched mine. They were full of a raw, unguarded emotion I had never seen in anyone. And then he kissed me. It wasn't like the first, hesitant kiss in the loft or the brief, certain promise at the club. This was a statement. It was deep and slow and desperate. A starving man's first meal, a drowning man's last breath. It was all the fear of the morning, all the adrenaline of the chase, all the tension of the coming fight, poured into a single, searing moment of absolute contact. His lips were firm and sure, moving over mine with a knowledge that made my knees buckle. It wasn't frantic, but it was total. My hands, which had been at my sides, came up to clutch the front of his shirt, holding on as the world spun away. It was a kiss that said, "You are here, and I am here, and God help anyone who tries to change that." It went on, a pocket of silence in the heart of the storm, blocking out the sound of the ticking clock, the muffled shouts from the plaza, the entire world. He broke the kiss, but he didn't let me go. He pressed his forehead against mine, his breath ragged, matching my own. His eyes were closed, his expression almost pained. "Mara," he whispered, his voice rough, cracking with an emotion he'd held back for so long. If this goes wrong, I need you to know." He pulled back just enough to force his eyes open, to lock his gaze with mine. "This isn't about my father," he said, his voice raw. "It's not about a debt, the locket, the promise from my family to yours. That's how we met. It is not why I'm standing in this room." He squeezed my hand, the one still pressed to his chest. "With me, you are not an obligation. You are not an inheritance. You are a choice. Mara, my choice." My heart, which I thought couldn't possibly beat any faster, gave a single, painful lurch. He had given me the one thing I had craved my entire life, the one thing I had told him I wanted, standing in that loft, the power of selection, and he had just handed it back to me. "Then I'm making mine," I whispered back, my voice thick but fierce. "I choose this. I choose to be here. I choose to stay, Cassian. Even when you try to push me into the safe car, even when you try to take the bullet, I am not leaving your side." I tightened my grip on his shirt. "That is my choice." A sharp official rap on the door shattered the moment. "5 minutes!" a bailiff's voice called out, muffled by the thick wood. "All parties to the hall." We pulled apart, but slowly, reluctantly. The world, with all its noise and all its dangers, rushed back in. Cassian's expression hardened, the granite returning, but his eyes, when they looked at me, held a new, burning light. He gave me one last, long look, a promise of later. He smoothed his shirt and, with a few quick, angry movements, rolled his sleeves back down. The boss, the defender, was back in place. We opened the door. The hallway was humming, a different kind of chaos from the plaza. Ezra was there, looking pale and determined, holding a small, flesh-colored earpiece. "Mara," he said, pressing it into my palm. "This is a secure comm, linked only to me. I'm in the audio-visual booth. When Roman hits that alarm, and he will, I'm rerouting the signal from the fire bells to the main sound system. But I'll need a cue from you. I'll need a trigger word. When you're ready to spring the trap, say, Goodnight, Harbor, the song from your first night." I nodded, my hand closing around the small piece of tech. "All right, listen," Mimosa said, joining us, her face a mask of iron. We began to walk toward the massive doors of the hearing room. "We're on the offensive. The judge is on our side for now. The order will be my opening statement. Then I call you, Mara, as primary witness. You will present the ledger, the notebook, and the Kestrel photos. We introduce the video of the fake BTI." Just as she spoke, 2 uniformed court officers came up the hall from a side entrance, escorting a pale, sweating, and visibly shaking Lyle Drummond. He saw me, and his eyes widened in terror. "Then," Mimosa continued, not breaking stride, "we call our corroborating witnesses. We'll start with Mr. Knott's affidavit, and then we put Hannah on the stand with her recording." Hannah was right behind Lyle, walking with a quiet, steely dignity, holding a small digital recorder in her hand. We reached the entrance to the hall, and from the other end of the corridor, the other side arrived. A phalanx of gray suits. In the center, Roman Dax. He was immaculate, his face smooth, projecting an air of complete, untroubled confidence. He was smiling, even nodding to a reporter. Beside him, looking equally polished and grave, was Mayor Silas Penbrook, and lingering just behind them, her face a mask of pure venom, was Irina Kroll. Her right arm was in a sleek black sling, her eyes fixed on Cassian. They saw us. We all stopped, 10 feet apart. Roman's smile didn't waver, but his eyes, empty and cold, locked with Cassian's. It was a silent, final declaration of war. Irina's gaze slid from Cassian to me, and it was pure, undiluted hatred. The air in the hallway became so thick, so charged with static and anticipation. It was hard to breathe. The drapes on the walls seemed to absorb all sound. A bailiff stepped out from the main doors. "All rise," he commanded, his voice booming. "The Bay District Court is now in session." The storm was here. The inside of Longshore Hall was a cavern of polished marble and hushed, anxious energy. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table, a small island in a sea of cameras and hostile stares. Across the aisle, Roman Dax sat with his team of lawyers, looking as calm and composed as if he were at an opera. Mayor Penbrook was beside him, a pale, sweating statue, in the public gallery. Irina Kroll watched us, her good arm resting on the back of the bench, her eyes promising a reckoning. The hearing began. Mimosa was brilliant, a surgeon with words, laying out the framework of the case. When Roman's lawyer had his turn, he was dismissive, almost laughing. "Your Honor," he boomed, "my client is the victim of a vicious smear campaign by a known criminal organization." He produced a document with a flourish. "As for the so-called BTI, I present to you this authorization, signed by Mayor Pembroke himself, commissioning Dax Urban Futures and its security contractors to protect the city's vital assets during this time of unrest." Mimosa rose calmly. "We object, Your Honor, and we formally request that the court contacts the United States Department of Commerce to verify the BTI's charter. I believe you will find no such federal agency exists." The judge, a stern-faced woman named Alani Reyes, looked intrigued. A ripple of speculation went through the press gallery. It was time. Mimosa called Lyle Drummond to the stand. He looked like a ghost, his skin clammy, his eyes darting nervously toward Roman Dax. He lied. He denied everything. He claimed he'd never seen the fake BTI agents, that he'd fired me for incompetence, that he'd never received instructions from Mr. Dax. Mimosa let him finish. "No further questions for this witness at this time, Your Honor." Then she called Hana to the stand. Hana walked with a quiet, unshakable dignity. She was sworn in. "Miss Watanabe," Mimosa began, "were you at the Nighthawk Club last night?" "I was." "And did you happen to record a conversation?" "I did, accidentally, a voice memo." She produced the small digital recorder. Mimosa submitted it as evidence. The court clerk connected it to the hall's sound system. Lyle's panicked, whining voice filled the marble chamber, and then the words that sealed his fate. "No, Mr. Dax, I didn't say anything, I swear. Your emergency plan. You said there was a plan if things went south at the hearing." The hall erupted. The judge hammered her gavel for order. I saw Roman's hand slip into his jacket pocket. He looked at me, a cold, dead smile on his face. This was it, the emergency button. He pressed it. A deafening klaxon began to blare. Strobe lights, the kind used for fire emergencies, began to flash, disorienting and blinding. People screamed, jumping to their feet, a wave of pure panic washing through the crowd. This was his chaos. This was his escape. I put my hand to the earpiece. The noise was overwhelming. "Now, Ezra," I whispered. "Good night, Harbor." The klaxon stopped. For a heartbeat. There was silence. Then, from the same speakers, a new sound emerged, not a bell, but a voice, Roman Dax's voice, from Hana's recording, clear and damning. "Your emergency plan. You said there was a plan if things went south." It played on a loop. At the same moment, the massive projector screen behind the judge, which was supposed to be showing an evacuation map, flickered to life. It wasn't a map. It was Ezra's spiderweb, the entire money trail, from the Graybridge Reconstruction Fund to Dax Urban Futures, to the fake BTI, to the mayor's offshore accounts, laid bare for the entire world to see. A live voice print analysis appeared on the screen, matching the voice from the recording to the live microphones on the defendant's table. Match confirmed, Roman Dax. He was trapped, exposed, humiliated by his own trap. Irina Kroll saw it. She saw her name on the Kestrel contracts, her signature now part of the public record, tying her inextricably to him. She was being thrown under the bus. I saw her stand, her one good hand reaching inside her jacket. Inez was already moving. She stepped behind Irina's bench, a ghost in the flashing lights, as Irina's hand emerged, holding a small, silver pistol. Inez's hand closed over hers. There was no strike, no struggle, just a calm, irresistible pressure on a single nerve. Irina's fingers went numb. The gun clattered harmlessly to the marble floor. Inez kicked it under the bench and was gone. Chaos erupted. One of Dax's gray-suited guards saw the tide turn and made a desperate move. He didn't go for Roman. He came for me. The witness. The source. He lunged over the low wooden barrier, a collapsible baton snapping open in his hand. I threw my hands up to shield my face, but I wasn't fast enough. A body slammed into mine, shielding me. Cassian. He had thrown himself in front of me. taking the full, brutal force of the baton strike across his back and shoulder. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. He absorbed the blow, pivoted, and in one fluid-controlled motion, had the guard's arm in a lock. He forced him face down onto the floor, pinning him with a simple, safe shoulder lock that neutralized him completely. He held him there, not hurting him, just containing him, until two uniformed Harbor Precinct officers rushed forward to slap on the cuffs. Across the room, Mayor Pembroke was trying to slip out a side door. He was met by Victor. The big man didn't say a word. He just held up a single, signed piece of paper, the secret partnership agreement from Roman's safe. The mayor stopped dead, his face crumbling. He put his hands behind his back before the police even asked. Roman Dax, his face a mask of pure, nihilistic rage, had one last card to play. He threw two small canisters into the aisle. They exploded in thick, acrid clouds of gray smoke, more screams, more panic. "Orderly!" Cassian roared, his voice cutting through the noise. "Vale security exits. Guide them out. No one gets hurt." His team, who had been blended into the crowd, moved with a quiet, disciplined purpose, creating calm corridors in the panic, guiding sobbing civilians toward the emergency exits. In the confusion, I saw the microphone on the witness stand, still live. I scrambled over, grabbing it, my voice shaking. "Stop, please, everyone, stop." My voice, amplified, echoed through the chamber. The panic subsided slightly, people turning toward the sound. "My name is Mara Quinn," I said, my voice gaining strength. "A week ago, I was a girl crying behind a diner, a girl who had her wages stolen, who was being threatened, who had nothing. And a man I didn't know asked me a simple question. He asked me, 'Who hurt you?' I looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras, and I looked directly at Roman Dax, who was being surrounded by police. Today, we have the answer," I declared, my voice ringing with a power I never knew I possessed. It was him. It was the mayor. It was a system that preys on the weak. But today, that ends. Today, we say that no one ever gets to hurt this city again. The gray-suited guards, the fake BTI, were being rounded up, dropping their weapons. Irina Kroll, seeing her options narrow to zero, was calmly talking to a detective, her face a mask of cold calculation. She had chosen to be a witness. The smoke cleared. Roman Dax and Mayor Pembroke were in cuffs. It was over. The press descended, a frantic swarm of microphones and flashing lights. They surrounded me, surrounded Cassian. "Mr. Vale, your alleged ties to organized crime," one reporter shouted. "Miss Quinn, were you coerced? Are you a victim of the Vale Syndicate as well?" I saw Cassian's face. For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability, of uncertainty. He took a half step away from me, a silent gesture, offering me an out, an opportunity to distance myself from him, the mob boss, to save my own reputation now that the battle was won. I looked at him, at the man who had taken a baton for me, who had respected my choices, who had held me on a rooftop and asked for nothing. I made my choice. In front of every camera, in front of the entire city. I reached out and took his hand. I laced my fingers through his, my grip firm and unshakable. I turned to the cameras. "This man is not my captor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "This is the man who stood between me and the violence when no one else would. He is my protector, and I am proud to stand with him." The aftermath was swift. The Bay District Appellate Court froze the Armitage Pier project indefinitely and opened a full-scale criminal investigation into Dax and Pembroke. In a move that stunned the city, the Vale Syndicate voluntarily signed a transparency accord, inviting a newly formed Citizens Oversight Committee to audit their legitimate businesses. That night, the Nighthawk was closed. The only sound was the soft crackle of a vinyl record. Ezra had put on the original pressing of Lark. My grandmother's voice, full of hope and heartache, filled the silent, amber-lit room. Cassian held out his hand. I took it. We danced. A slow, simple circle in the middle of the empty floor. The lights were warm, the music a ghost's embrace. When the song ended, He pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine, his arms wrapped securely around me. A new beginning, quiet and peaceful and earned. The Starling Diner didn't reopen. A month later, a new sign went up, Lark and Vale. It was a clean, bright eatery serving affordable, hearty food for the late-shift workers of the harbor. On the wall, right by the entrance, hung a single, beautifully framed black and white photograph of my grandmother, smiling, a gardenia in her hair. One evening, as Cashin and I stood outside, watching the warm light spill onto the sidewalk, he turned to me. He repeated the first words he ever spoke to me, but this time, they were a whisper, soft and intimate, meant only for me. "Who hurt you?" he said, his thumb brushing my cheek. "It's done. The rest." He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his dark eyes. "Let's heal it together." The city of Graybridge was breathing again. The storm had passed. Our story hadn't been written by power, or by debt, or by fate. It was written by two people, from two different worlds, who had simply looked at each other and chosen. And that choice, made freely, was the one thing in the city that was truly untouchable. Thank you so much for listening to our story. It means the world to us. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed our journey, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like, and if you can, support us by hitting that hype button. It helps more than you know and allows these stories to be heard by so many more people.